Hello barrel racers. So for this lesson we're going to go over the bits that barrel racers typically use. These bits, I'm going to start with kind of the more beginner basic ones. I don't have a lot of super fancy bits to show you. I like more simple, like not super mechanical, where it's very kind of like direct cues where it's not a lot of mechanisms happening in the bits, but at the same time sometimes you do need things like that depending on the horse and how your hands are. And it is something that takes quite a lot of time to develop the feel in a bit and seeing how much you like it, how much your horse likes it. And it has to be both ways. Like you can't use a bit that doesn't work for you and vice versa. So it is a bit of a skill and it just takes time to develop the feel of what you need and what your horses needs. But what I'm going to show you are some really great places to start and just kind of tell you how they work, how they should feel, and then you can experiment with them and see what feels the best. I'm going to start today just with your very simple O-rings. So O-rings can have very, like, all the mouthpieces possible. You can go from a chain to a two-piece to a square mouthpiece to a dog bone in the middle to a ring in the middle, like a Lifesaver style mouthpiece. The ones that I have that I've kind of stuck with are pretty simple ones. This is just it's a fatter twist, and the other ones I'm going to show you. So this one slides all the way around. There's no stoppers or anything, so it just is really free. And it has the two-piece really fat, so this is a pretty light bit. If you have a really sensitive horse or you're just starting horses, I use this for starting my horses, and then even starting on the pattern. I'll go to something like this until I feel that the horse tells me I need to try something else, and then I will experiment with some other stuff that I'll show you later. So that is called more of a snaffle mouthpiece. So the two-piece is called snaffle. The other one that is a bit similar, a little different, still it's an O-ring. This has a three-piece. So it's a three-piece, and that thing in the middle is called a dog bone. So whenever you see people or hear people say, oh, like, you know, fat, like a twist dog bone, this is what they mean. And this one, if you notice, it has a stopper so it doesn't slide all the way through. That just helps you with your side pull. So side pulls when you literally take the rein and you pull it directly out. That's kind of you just pulling like on the side. So instead of it sliding all the way through, it just kind of helps get that outside rein support. So if you see bits like a D ring, instead of an O ring, it's shaped like a D. That gets a lot of, so when you do a side pull, it might slide kind of through the bit and you don't get a lot of the outside pressure to bring the nose like this. Where if you have something like a D ring or like those full cheek bits, I'm sure you've seen them, it's more common in like the English world. The full cheek is there to like do this. So this one is a little bit more stability like that, where the one I showed you previously, it's really slidey, so it doesn't have much of that like direct pull, bringing the outside part of the bit to push on the mouth and move them over. It's a bit more free. So some people this would be maybe like a second option to try. Also, one key rule is the more breaks you have, typically the more bend you get. So I like O-rings in a two-piece typically, because I feel that because you're in an O-ring, it already is pretty bendy. It's more of a bendy bit. So I like to put a two-piece on just because I feel like I have more contact and I have more control than with something like this. But at the same time, I've never tried an O-ring with a chain before. I'm curious to see how that feels, but I feel like it would just be a lot more like a little loose feeling and not as much control and stability. Another O-ring that is an option so I've showed you two really more light ones that you might have to, or you might find yourself really heavy-handed in, which is not what we want. I like to think like we bit up our horses so we have light hands. We're not doing our horses justice by putting a light bit in their mouth, but we have to be super heavy, because that causes us to have bad habits of just being heavier handed, which we definitely want to avoid. And also it makes your horse really dull because they still feel the metal in their mouth, but they're not being responsive to it. So the more heavy you are, the more dull their mouth's gonna get. And that's what we want to avoid as well, because you can scar up a horse's mouth and cause damage that they literally start to either mentally get dull from it, and also physically their mouth becomes scarred and dull from the bit. So if I feel like I want to still use an O-ring and just experiment with different mouthpieces, and also if my horse is just being a little heavy, I will put on something more severe with the mouthpiece. So this is a 2-piece square. So why they use squares is, instead of being twisted and round where it's, when it slides in the mouth, it's always kind of like, I don't know, like the twisting, it's not direct contact as much. Where with a square, because it's kind of sharper on the edges, it's not as bad as a really thin twist. It's a bit thicker, but it is a square. So when the mouth gets rubbed, or when it sits in the mouth and it has the few edges on the mouth, it makes it a pretty severe bit. And you can cut a horse in something like this. So if you are experimenting with a bit more like this style, be really careful. And I've used this for competitions, and I did cut my horse's mouth a bit just because it is an O-ring. So you still might feel like you're heavy-handed because just of the fact that it's an O-ring. But even though the mouthpiece is severe, you're still not really getting quite the leverage you need, or whatever it is that you need at the time, you might not be getting it. So I will use this mostly just for training, where I'm more mindful about my hands and not in a run where, you know, you kind of lose your brain a little bit and you might get heavy-handed when you don't mean to. All right, moving on from an O-ring, this is a really nice beginner-friendly bit that I would recommend if you're trying to transition to something with a little bit more lift and even some whoa. So this is made by L&W. Not really sure what it's called. It's some form of lifter bit, but it has the 3-piece, which I kind of like in, I just typically buy 3 pieces or the 2-piece, like the snaffle mouthpiece. I don't know, I just, this is just a good one to have. I find you get a little lift, it's pretty light, a lot of horses respect it and enjoy it. It's not a crazy intrusive bit, but it's one to just have that you can experiment with and see how your horse reacts to a little bit of leverage. It's a good introduction bit for that. So if you've never used a bit with a shank on it, this is a good place to start because it is pretty short. That's only probably like a 2-inch shank. And it just seems like horses seem to really enjoy it. And also the curb, the little chain hanging there, is pretty loose, and it doesn't really do a whole lot because it's pretty free. If you see that, like, it doesn't have, like, some of them have like they're more in a locked spot, so when the leverage actually goes with the bit, it actually, and like this engages. Where with this type of bit, it's not really going to engage a whole lot, but it's enough that it's a good intro for your horse to actually feel the curb strap and to understand what it does. And this might seem like a lot. Bits are super technical and complex things. I love them and I hate them just because there's so many options out there, and it really takes a lot of work to actually figure out which works. So now I'm going to show you just a few of my favorites that I typically use all the time and that I really enjoy. And I'm going to start with a rope gag. So a lot of barrel racers and trainers will use a more, they use either a actual like roping rope or just a really simple, more flexible rope for the slide. So this is what it looks like. You can see I have the leather pole part. Some people have just like a wire or a chain over top, where I don't really want it to be that severe. Like, I feel like if I need something that's a really thin wire on the top of my horse's head, I have bigger problems. So I like to keep this pretty light, and I run in it, and that's the same thing. I don't want to run in something super heavy. So the fact that it's a leather top and not wire, I feel more confident in myself running in it because I don't want to hurt my horses. Like, these are aids, these are training aids. They're not used to cause pain, to cause our horses to come in submission to do something. That's just how I view training, and I don't want to cause my horse pain, especially on purpose, and if I don't have to, or even not on purpose. Like when I run, like I said, I get a bit heavy and I don't want to accidentally get too excited and pull too hard and cause my horse discomfort. So what I love about this is, so it is a 2-piece, as you can see, like I'm a fan. The slide causes a lot of natural bend in a horse. So if you have a really stiff horse that just won't bring their nose around, they're just stiff in their body, this type of bit will really help free them up a little bit and just kind of get them to be more bringing their nose down and coming around really nicely. The one thing I'll say, so this type of style, you really can't pull both reins back at the same time. It causes a lot of, like if you see horses with their mouth gaped open, because it slides. So if you slide it like that, the horse's mouth is only so long or so big that if it slides all the way like this, you're smushing the horse's like pull to here and it's getting tighter. So it's gonna make the horse's mouth gape open and you kind of eliminate a lot of the response you want from it when that happens. So you have to be pretty careful and just know that when you use this, you have to be pretty light and you have to mostly use one rein at a time, which I will show you kind of a lot of ideas that will help you if you're trying to stop your horse instead of pulling both reins back. There are options where it's a little less intrusive and just not as much as like a straight pullback with both hands, especially when you use a bit like this. But this is a really good training one. I use it all the time with any horses I get in or just tuning up a horse. I find most horses really enjoy this type of bridle. Now, one that's really similar to that rope gag I just showed you is more of a steel slider. So I'm sure you've heard of the no-hip bits. They're really long steel and the bit slides nicely through it. So that is called a no-hip. There's also different variations of it. I have a different variation. This is made from Reinsman. And as you can see, it's the same idea of it sliding, but obviously it's steel. So it's not bending when you slide it. So it's more of a straight up and down, where the rope, when you pull, the rope obviously goes like this, where this gives you a bit more leverage because it is steel. So what that kind of looks like, if you think about this sitting in your horse's mouth and you go to pull, see how when you pull back, it's pulling up. And that's kind of going to help you get a bit more leverage with your horse. And also I think a bit more, you're going to have more control and more lift with this, where the rope really doesn't give you a whole lot of that. Where, yeah, if you need a horse that, you know, you've tried the rope one, but you want something just to step up, I would recommend maybe something like this or the no-hit, where it's just more secure, it's more solid. So you get a bit of more, you get lift with it, if that's something that you and your horse need. I just find it a pretty nice bit to keep, and I'll throw it on a horse once in a while just to see how they respond. I might not use it a lot for running, but it is good. I enjoy something like this just with a lot of gag, just to have an experiment with my horses to see how they respond to that type of move. And then from there, I'm able to decide if I need a bit more shank, if I need less shank, if I need more gag or less gag. This is a really good place to start and a good place to start experimenting with kind of what is going to work for your horse. Like, do I need a 2-piece or a 3? There's just so many things that go involved. So from here, it depends what my horse tells me, what my horse is saying they like or not. But from here, a few other options that I enjoy. For starters, this is a Kathy James. This is one that I would go maybe after I tried that Reinsman, the steel sliding gag bit. I ordered this when I was living in the States, and it's called a reverse gag. So see how where this is to this bar, the gag is kind of like bulging out a bit. So that's called a reverse gag. You'll see a lot of different varieties of those with like either this big of a reverse gag or a bit longer shank with something like this. But that is what that is called. Whenever you hear someone say reverse gag, it means that the gag is kind of sticking out from the actual bit part. So the reason I have chose this bit to show you is it gives you a bit of variety of what actually is available as far as bits go. This one can literally come in so many different variations. Even the mouthpiece itself, the mouthpiece is you can see that it's a chain with copper inlay and has chain in the middle. So it gives you a little bit of both, where if you feel like you need a bit more than a full chain, like your horse is pretty bendy, but not, like you still need a little bit of something. I really enjoy this, where it gives me the solid bit of the you know, like the twist, but it also has chain in the middle that more lays on their mouth and isn't more sharp and edgy. It just kind of lays along their tongue nicer. And all my horses seem to enjoy it. I enjoy using it. Right now I've been running my Futurity horse in something like this. This actually is called her Futurity bit. And it's just I I just kind of like it. I'll put it on any horse and see, like I said, I can see if I need more shank or not, if I need more gag. It's just another good place to start with a horse to see what they need. And I will always put this on with this, because if you see how far the bridle hooks up to the bit, it's pretty long, so that means there's quite a lot of leverage. So when you pull like this is going to go down. It's going to get you pulling on their pole. And I will keep the chain pretty loose. So when it's sitting in the horse's mouth, this is pretty loose. It doesn't get activated a whole lot. And it is a bridle that I like to keep pretty loose. I don't want a couple wrinkles in my horse's mouth. And then just because it's a gag, you don't have it tighter. Like, I don't mind having it sit like this, and when I pull, the gag already is initiated. Like, I don't want it to be super tight where I have to pull really hard for the gag to work, because the gag is there for a reason. And I don't know, I just don't believe that you should have it that tight where you have to really pull to activate the gag. Like, it's there for a purpose, and I like to have it loose enough in my horse's mouth where when I give a little pull, it already starts to slide. And that's also just a rule of thumb. I try not to have your bits that tight. Like, I'll show you how I like my bits to sit in their mouth, but just think of, you want it to be there, but you don't want it to, like I said, cause them to be dull because it's pulling on them just sitting in their mouth. You want there to be a black and white. You want no contact to you using the bit, not the bit sitting there always causing contact. So just keep that in mind and think about that when you're putting a bridle on and deciding what length to have the bit sit in their mouth. Do it enough that it's sitting there, but not like it's actually causing them like to wrinkle. So if you think about it, if you're always pulling like this and then you pull your rein and try to do something with them, they're not really going to notice the difference of the pressure release. And horses are trained by pressure and release. So we have to really make sure that they get a clear signal of pressure and release. Another interesting bit that I'm going to show you that I don't use a whole lot, but I'm just going to explain it to you and tell you what it does. And so this is made by L&W. It's called a lifter. So the interesting thing with this, if you notice, the mouthpiece is right in the middle of the bit. So what that means is it's just more balanced instead of having a longer shank, which causes more woe, or if this is taller, it causes more pull pressure. This sits in the middle, so it more does both at the same time. Not as much woe, not as much pull pressure, but it's very balanced. The reason I bought this in a chain mouthpiece is I thought at the time my one mare, she is pretty powerful and very stiff. So I thought this, because it's there's not a whole lot of gag there. It moves just not a lot. Like, there's hardly any movement. But I thought something like this would work for her because I would be able to be a bit quicker. I could get a quicker response because there's not as much gag. And since there isn't as much gag, it's not as bendy. So the more gag, the more bend typically you have. So I thought to balance it out with no gag, I would get a chain mouthpiece, which gives me a little bit of flexibility and hopefully some bend with my horse. I don't use it a whole lot, but it is a good option if you have a bit of a chargier horse that you just need to get a bit of lift, bit of woe, bit of bend. This is probably something that I would recommend trying. The next one I'm going to show you is also made by L&W. I bought it on a complete whim. Again, I look at bits and I base what does my horse need? Do I need more woe? Do I need more bend? What's happening? And then I will go bit shopping and see what I find that I think will work. So this is one that was one of those situations, and ever since I've totally loved it. This is the, gonna get it wrong. It's either the Jim Edwards or I'll have to fact check that. Anyways, this bit I really enjoy on my Palomino mare Marshmallow. She is the type of horse, she's pretty stiff, she's pretty strong, but she needed a little bit of woe, but she also needed some forgiveness because she would get scared and run away from the bit. And that was a big problem I had with Second Barrel, is I would go to help finish it and, give a little pull to help guide her around, and she would not enjoy it. She would put her head the other way and run away from it. So I'm like, I need something that's soft, but yet I have a bit of control and feel when I need it. So this is what I came across, and I thought it was the perfect thing. I'm like, this has everything I think I need. It has the gag, so it's not as scary. It also has the chain mouthpiece, so I'm not gonna it's just gonna lay in her mouth nicer, and it's not gonna be as severe when I go to pull. It's not gonna scare her, I didn't think. But I also had the little bit of shank that I needed, that I felt I needed to get her to either lift a bit more and just have more control. So I bought this and I absolutely loved it. Also, if you notice, the curb chain is set back a little bit. So this one and the one I just showed you, the lifter, has a little bit of setback curb. So what that means is, like, instead of having the curb chain here where it's pretty flexible and flimsy, you have it set here where it's more direct. So when you actually go to pull on it, when you go to do this, see how like the leverage of this actually changes? Like, it's not just flimsy, it actually activates. Again, I don't have the chain super tight, but I just really enjoy this bridle. It's pretty popular. I've seen it used like a ton. So if you have a horse that you find is a little scared of bits, they're a little bit more picky, but they're also pretty quick and you need something with more control, I would maybe try something like this where you get a bit of leverage and lift, but you also get a bit of softness and bend with the gag. The last one I'm gonna show you is nothing like any of the ones I've showed you yet. This one, it's not that intense. Like I said, I don't have very many complex bits. But this one is one of my favorites, and the reason is because of the mouthpiece. So this is what you call a port. This is almost like a floating port. I enjoy it. So the port gives your horse tongue relief. So if you think about this sitting in your horse's mouth, their tongue is in the middle, so when you pull, there's not tongue pressure, which some horses absolutely hate having tongue pressure, and this literally will give you a different horse. The reason I enjoy this one is it really isn't too intense. It's a pretty light bit overall. And as again, you can see as with the lifter, this is right in the middle. So there's just as much length here as there is here. But the mouthpiece is what I really wanted to show you. This one has, it's kind of like a bit of a copper right there, little rolled copper. The reason I think that we get along really well with this bit and why a lot of barrel racers use something with this is it gives you a bit more control without actually being intrusive and scaring your horse. So a lot of horses you don't know are more sensitive with their tongue pressure, and a lot of the bits don't really accommodate those horses. So if you get something like, if you have a really sensitive horse but you don't know why and nothing seems to work, they just don't like anything, I would recommend getting something with a port. So there are a few different mouthpiece variations with the ported bit. You can get chain on the edges instead of it being more solid. That just gives you a bit more flexibility with your horse, and they seem to enjoy it quite a lot. I've had no issues with anything that had a port in it. All the horses seem to actually kind of like it, and it just gives you a bit of different feel. And I mean, you're getting the same idea because the bit really isn't changing a lot, but just the mouthpiece can make a huge difference. When you're going to buy a bit, I would recommend just being able to try as many as you can, and don't be afraid to put one that you're not even sure how it's going to work in your horse's mouth. Try it for your practice ride and just see what happens. Get used to it and see what you need to change from there. And definitely just experimenting as much as you can will help you find that perfect bit that your horse loves, that you love, and it's your go-to. There will be more about bits, so don't be worried if we didn't talk about any of the ones that you use or that you have questions about. That's it today for this bit segment. There will be definitely a lot more as I get new bits, and as I experiment more with them, I will be sharing way more bits with you. If you have any bits or anything like that you're concerned about or curious and you want to know more, please ask me. I will find the answers for you, and we will together help you find your favorite bit for you and your horse.